Welcome everybody from around the world, whether the sun has just come out or it's noon or maybe it's setting. My name is Rowan Zain and I'm the Membership Engagement and Community of Practice Manager at the Leading Change Network. I see some familiar names and faces here as well as some new ones. Excited to have everybody here today. So we're very excited to be hosting Sarah Raheb from Canada to introduce to us the narrative moments of disruptive change. So we invited Sarah today specifically to come speak to us about this because as we practice leadership, oftentimes we're faced with challenges such as loss, difference, change, and power, where people might react rather than respond to that challenge. So we asked Sarah to come here today to come and share with us how we use narrative to help build our community and help them face their challenges with agency. But before we get started, let's quickly just do agenda, tech check. And for those who are new, I would like to introduce LCN. For those who have heard this before, thank you for your patience. Jacob, if you can please change the slide. And special thanks to Jacob who's volunteering with us today to be our IT support. And there's also James Sleep here, who's our IT manager and communications person. So welcome everyone. So we're gonna just do a quick check-in. I'm gonna take around 10 minutes, just do some tech, LCN, and a quick chat exercise where we can get to know each other. And then then I'll introduce Sarah, and then Sarah will introduce herself and then present narrative and moments of disruptive change. And then we're gonna have a fishbowl here in the large group, and then we're gonna put everybody in breakout rooms because we learned through practice here. And then we'll come back out and debrief and do takeaways and close the session. Jacob, next slide, please. So just some notes on technology. As I said, if you have any tech problems, just put in @tech, and Jake and James will be there zooming in to support you. This session will be recorded, but the parts that are going to be recorded is the presentation part. So obviously the breakout rooms won't be shared into the public, nor will the takeaways at the end as well. And just as a good norm for everybody to have, if you can make sure you're on mute if you aren't speaking, so this does not disrupt the session. And we welcome you to use the chat if you have any comments, questions, thoughts, reflections, readings that pop into your mind. Please do share those with us. I will be reviewing that, but let's make sure we stay on topic. So next slide, please. Perfect. So why LCN and what is it that we do? So looking at the current state of the world, it might seem pretty dismal, right? We see power being consolidated in Australia just recently with elections that took power. The right consolidating their power in Australia as we did last year. We saw what happened with Brazil and its elections, the controversy about abortion rights taking place in the US, the human rights violations that are taking around the world. So it seems like, I don't know about you guys, but mainly I just sit in front of the TV and I'm just angry and frustrated and, sometimes feeling really small. But when I come here to the LCN and I hear about all the awesome work that we're doing, we've had people who were in Nicaragua last month going down there to support activists to fight against the regime there. We've had people who are doing trainings with March for Your Lives. We see all this amazing work that's taking place around the world. Just recently, over 200 people who took Marshall's class online, on ground, and the Ahel's class as well in the Arab world. They're doing all these campaigns, all this amazing work, but everybody's doing it in silos, right? And so this is where LCN really comes in. So why do we do this amazing work, all this inspiring work, and at the same time, there's very a place where everybody's learning and practicing, and everybody's doing it alone. So that's where Leading Change comes in. And we are the place where people can come here together, talk about what they're doing so we can learn from one another and strengthen our movements around the world. So next slide, please. So what is the Leading Change Network? We're a global community of organizers, educators, and researchers, and our mission is to develop leadership, build organizing capacity, and support campaigns for social change through a community of practice, ongoing learning, and coaching. We currently have over 6,000 people who have subscribed from 75 different countries onto our list. But right now, since we launched in December, we have 200 members from 28 different countries speaking 23 different languages, Um, it's 58% women, 42% men, around 59% US and 41 international. Our community are not only diverse in terms of where they're from, but they're diverse in terms of the topics they work on, from healthcare, criminal justice, you name it, we got it. And we also have people with lots of different experience in organizing. Some of them are educators and trainers, others are researchers and academics. Some are new to the framework, the LCN pedagogy. Some have been doing it for years. So we're a very rich community in terms of our knowledge. Next slide, please. And so what do? We develop leadership that to build relationships, tell stories, devise strategy, structure, and take action. We strengthen organizing practices through peer support, research, and ongoing learning. And we also want to build organizational capacity to train, coach, and conduct campaigns in the different communities that we work with around the world. And so how do we go about doing this? Next slide, please. So the way we go about doing this is through our 3 LCN programs. So there's learning organizing, which is to develop leadership with depth, diversity, skill for building power, organizing action, and creating change. And today's session does fall under this. So thank you so much, Sarah, for coming in and helping us achieve this program. We also provide coaching and support. So for those who are doing campaigns on the ground or who want to develop their narratives, for example, they can reach out to us and we'll connect them with coaches to get the support, the coaching and support they need in the work that they're doing on the ground. And the third is the community of practice. This is a place where we come in as members and talk about what we're doing, how we're adapting the work, what we're learning, what are our challenges, and learning from one another based on the work on the ground. So those are our programs. Next slide, please. So please join us. I mean, I personally joined Leading Change Network back in 2012. I took Marshall's class in 2010, and I fell in love with the idea of, putting the people first and power, because I grew up I was born in Jordan, but when I was 8, we moved around a lot. And I had so many different communities that came to me and welcomed me, and I welcomed them. And together we learned and grew together. And so with LCN, it was kind of the place where I was able to continue my learning and organizing and build relationships with amazing people like Sarah and James and a lot of you guys here, and to continue my learning. So it wasn't just an online class that I took and walked away from. It's a great way for us to stay engaged and practice in our work. So I encourage you all to join, continue learning and growing in your craft of leadership here at LCN. Join a community that all speaks the same language. So that's another great part about how we work together, is that we have a shared pedagogy in which we want to create change in the world. And it's also a place for you to share your work and reflections and learn from one another. So you can either subscribe just to be on our mailing list, or you can be a member with us. Next slide, please. And so I know summer's coming up, so our events are mainly a lot of local meetups and community gatherings. So coming up in July, just so you know, if you live in Cambridge, we are going to do another local meetup. So for people in Cambridge to get to know and meet one another. We also have 2 groups that have been meeting. There's the Workers' Movement Group. So this is for people who work in labor unions and workers' rights. They've created a small group to come and say, how can we learn from one another in our specific context? And similarly, there's a Latin America group. Also, please, like I said, join us if you're not a member. And if you are a member, please do make sure to fill up your profile on our website. All right, so just next slide, please. In terms of who's with us here today, we have 81 people had registered. Right now we have 44 online. From those who registered, it was from 26 different countries. And it's around 65% female, 32% male, and 2% who said they prefer not to say. And they're working in around 73 different organizations. And I did want to do a quick check-in, so I'm just going to do this for a second. If we can do the next slide, so we can, or click next. All right, cool. So if we can just take 30 seconds, if everyone can just write their name in the chat with their city and country of residence, your organization. And my question is, what helps you practice, what practice helps you respond rather than react to a certain disruptive challenge? So just a quick reflective question there before we get started. So yeah, let's just take 5 seconds and see what comes in the chat. the name, country. So there's Roberta in the US, Grady. Hey, Nizar. Hey, Grady. There's Meredith. Great. We're around the world. Regular meeting with teams helps us to reflect. Yes. All right, great. So as you guys continue doing that, I'll also continue just to save time to introduce Sarah. So I first met Sarah in 2015 in a training we did together, I believe. And it's been a marvelous relationship working with her since then. And I just want to share with everybody, Sarah, like when she's coaching, she's so present and so engaged and so like there's no one else in the room and she just digs in there. And then the way she does it with so much love and care. Like as much as she's pushing, she's constantly loving, which is something I truly admire. So thank you, Sarah. And Sarah helped me with my story just a couple months ago. So and a little bit more about Sarah's experience. So Sarah is Canadian Egyptian, who's an educator and coach who specializes in teaching public narrative, organizing and leadership. She has a master's in education from the Harvard School of Education with a focus on the arts and education. She's worked with Marshall since 2015 at the Kennedy School as his head teaching fellow and is currently as a pedagogy and curriculum specialist. I could go on, but you guys can just read this, and I think we'd all prefer to hear Sarah introduce herself. So Sarah, I'll give you the floor.
Thank you, Rowan. What a nice introduction. I really appreciate that. As Rowan said, my name is Sarah Al-Rahib, and I am Egyptian Canadian. I'm really excited to be on this call with you today. Maybe we can stop the screen share so that we can see as many faces as possible for the minute. Is that possible to just stop the screen share? Okay, while we're doing that, there we go. Okay, so if you see at the top, there's like this gallery view in the top right. If you're not already on there and you've never used this before, touch that gallery view because then you'll see many faces at once instead of just my big talking face. It'll help us all see each other and communicate with each other. Yeah, let's just give like a little wave. You see people you recognize? Yeah, I see some familiar faces. It's so nice to be on this call with you all. So as Rowan mentioned, we're going to be talking about narrative in moments of disruptive change. So what does this mean? It means how do we respond as leaders in moments where things are uncertain, in moments where there's a clear power inequality, there's a change that's just taken place, people have faced a loss, or people are trying to work through differences. In a lot of you, I'm sure, are familiar with Self Us Now and telling a story in these moments, but this is more about analyzing and understanding how responses in these moments of challenge either bring people forward or keep people exactly where they are, or in some cases, put people even further back. This all centers around enabling other people's agency. And we'll get into the slides, we'll get into the content real deep, but that's what you are here for today. I'd like to take just like 2 minutes to hear from a couple people. What are you hoping to get out of this session today? So familiarize yourself with the mute and unmute because y'all are gonna be talking during the session, so get used to it. No cuteness, no shyness, just jump in. What are you hoping to get out of this session today? Let's hear a couple voices. I heard an exhale. That should be followed by words. Who exhaled?
That was me, Mohammed.
Mohammed, go for it. What are you hoping to get out of today?
Actually, I want to get back to the practices with Marshall. I want to remember what was the structure of the LOA. So this is why I joined this session.
Awesome.
To refresh my memory.
Great. I hope your memory will be refreshed, and I hope you'll learn a little bit more today as well, some new concepts. That's awesome. Great. Another voice. Let's hear another couple voices.
Yeah. Hi.
Natasha.
Yes, I'm really excited. I think public narrative is one of my most favorite parts of organizing. I feel like just learning different kinds because we're living in difficult times. and it requires us to be as innovative as possible in the way we are telling our stories. I think we're working on campaigns where there is high stigma. There is also lack of urgency, a lot of apathy. So what kind of narratives can build bigger movements? Like, what do we need to change? Like, those are the kind of things I'm really looking forward to learn from this session.
Awesome. Awesome. Thanks, Natasha. Let's hear one more voice.
I can jump in. Hi, Sarah. I feel I still need to learn more about narrative too, and to be able, maybe when I read a narrative or hear a narrative in the country, like in the newspaper, to kind of analyze or have a little bit of more emphasis on what is this, what is it coming from, how can it be different, and something like that. Awesome. And introducing my daughter also to narrative here for the first time.
Yes. What's her name?
Ebba.
Hi, Ebba. Nice to meet you. Yay, that's so fun. The new generation. I love it. Okay, great. So this is good. Getting some ideas of why people are here, what people are looking forward to. I think some of these things will be addressed, some of them won't, but we'll be able to keep working on this and building on it as we go. So I'm going to just share my screen, and I'm going to get us started here with these slides. So give me a second. All right. So yes, we're here to talk about narrative in moments of disruptive challenge. Now, can somebody just please read this definition of leadership out loud? I'm sure a lot of us are familiar, but let's refresh our memories. Someone please read this definition out loud.
A leadership challenge occurs at a specific moment in which one is confronted with the responsibility to enable others to respond to a disruptive challenge with agency.
That was a really familiar voice. Who was that?
Leah from Toronto.
That's why. Yes. Oh, that's why your voice is familiar. Leah, cool. Thank you for that. So let's deconstruct this definition, right? We know that the definition of leadership is to accept responsibility, to enable others to achieve shared purpose under conditions of uncertainty. When we are trying to define what a leadership challenge is in this scenario, we're really talking about a leadership challenge that happens specifically in a moment. So it's not what was the general response to this challenge. It's what were the actual words that came out of someone's mouth or didn't come out of someone's mouth when there is a challenge that we are being faced with. And the idea here is, how do we enable other people to respond to these challenges instead of reacting to these disruptive challenges? So responding with agency instead of reacting with fear. And folks will be familiar with this graphic here, which is all about what are the emotions that enable and motivate our agency, and what are the emotions that inhibit our agency. So first, defining agency, we define it as the emotional capacity to make mindful choice. The emotional capacity to make mindful choice. I'm going to stop the share here for a second and ask you all, what does that mean to you? What does the definition of agency mean to you? What does that mean? I'm going to start cold calling. Celine. Hi, Celine. So, what does that definition of agency mean to you, Celine?
It's somehow related I link it to the idea of agenda. So being able to move my agenda forward, but in a strategic, being strategic also about it, and taking into consideration what's happening around me.
Yeah, that's really good. Anybody want to add to that? Yeah, I think agency in the way that we're defining it is really important because it's knowing, understanding, feeling grounded, and then making these choices. So not feeling that you're pushed into making a decision or that you're reacting and making a decision from a reaction, but it's mindful. It's mindful, it's thought through, it's, okay, I have the information I need. I feel that I'm making this from a very clear emotional place. I don't feel like I'm being pushed into this. A lot of times when we face challenge, of course, we feel sometimes that I have to make this decision or else this will be the result. Anyone resonate with that? Well, this is the choice I have to make. I don't really have another choice here. And how does that feel? I see some nodding. How does that feel when you feel pushed into a corner because you have to make a decision in a certain way. Jacob. Yeah, there you, oh, look at, we are, that was good. Yeah, go ahead.
It feels scary. It feels scary, and you know, it's a moment of anxiety that sometimes might result to you reacting and kind of just fixing the problem without thinking long term, for instance, because this is what I just feel like this is what I've got to do right now, and it rarely solves the problem sustainably.
So good, right? It's a quick fix. You feel nervous doing it. There's anxiety that comes up when you're doing it. And it doesn't really actually solve the problem in any kind of way. It's just pushing you to make some kind of decision because you're afraid. And that's exactly what Module 2 is about. It's about, again, I'm going to pull up these slides. It's about responding instead of reacting. It's about enabling people's agency to respond with hope, with solidarity, with self-efficacy, as opposed to having them react in fear or isolation. Challenges come up in our work every single day. And as leaders, it's up to us to decide how are we going to encourage people to move forward or not. Now, speaking of moving forward, I don't want to move forward without kind of telling you who the hell I am. That's probably an important thing to do. So I'm going to just take this second to share my narrative, my story of self, and what brings me to this work. Is that okay with everybody? Well, imagine someone's like, no, it's not okay. That would be awkward. Okay, let me jump in. It all kind of starts when I'm 13 years old, and I'm watching the boy of my dreams, Jordy McNeil, play soccer, okay? And he's like really hot for a 13-year-old, and all I want him to do is notice me. And so it's like a beautiful, bright, sunny day, and I'm sitting on the bleachers, and I finally kind of get my opportunity. So he scores a goal, and I start cheering for him at the top of my lungs, right? I'm pumped. I'm like so excited. I'm cheering for him, and just as he turns around in slow motion to smile at me, I hear this voice behind me say, sit your ass down. You're nothing but brown, fat, and loud. And at 13, those words kind of stabbed me like a knife. I felt so embarrassed. All the joy that I had about being there kind of just went away. And most importantly, I just didn't know what to say. Like I felt so humiliated that I didn't know how to respond. So I kind of just shut my mouth and I sat down for the rest of the game, deflated, hurt. And I didn't know what to do. And there were a lot of moments where I kind of didn't know what to do growing up. And I was really, embarrassed of a lot of things in my own identity. I was made fun of a lot for the color of my skin. I was made fun of for my weight. I was made fun of for the fact that I had an opinion and a thought about something. I was a little bit outspoken. And it was after one of these moments, I'm sitting on my childhood bed. It's this like single bed with this floral bedspread on top. And I'm staring up at my Will Smith poster and I'm crying. And my dad walks in with his 70s afro, even though it's the 90s, and his like thick Egyptian accent, his slight coffee breath. And he asks me, what's wrong? And I say to him, Dad, I'm just not happy. And he says something to me in that moment I'll never forget. He says, instead of striving for happiness, I want you to search for peace. And I was like, what the hell is this guy talking about? He leaves my room. He comes back with this blue notebook with silver lettering on the front. It says engineering composition book. It's this empty grid paper notebook that he brought with him from his studies in Egypt when he was studying to be an engineer. And he hands it to me and he says, every single time you feel this way, instead of feeling sorry for yourself, I want you to write about it. And something in me just like believes in my dad with all my heart and just believes everything he says. To this day, whatever advice he gives me, I take it. And so I take his advice and I start writing really bad poetry and short stories and journal entries and plays. And every time I write something, I share it with my mom and my dad and my sister and my brother. And they make me feel like it's the best thing that they've ever heard in their life. Like they make me feel like it's the best writing they've ever heard. And I know it's not, but they believe in me so much that eventually I get really good. I become a good writer. And I learned that in these moments where I feel helpless, in these moments where I feel like I have no voice, that I actually do have a voice and I do have something to say. And that the people in my life have shown me that what I say matters. And so years later, when I had the chance to take Marshall's public narrative class, I was able to tell my story for the first time without hiding behind a character, without hiding behind a poem or a short story. And in being able to express who I am, not just for the sake of it, but for the purpose of motivating others to act with me, I knew I found my calling. And so for the last 5 years now, which is wild, I've been doing public narrative and organizing and working with Marshall on pedagogy and curriculum. And that's what brings me here today, because we have done a lot of work on Module 2 and we're hoping that that will be useful for you in your own practice. So thank you for having me here and thank you for listening to my story. Now, oh, thank you, Anjali with the snap. I like this. Oh, yes, I'll take it. Thanks. All right, so we're gonna keep moving along, and I know this is a breakneck speed, and I know for folks that might be overwhelming. Bear with me, it's an introduction, and hopefully we'll be able to get into this more deeply as we go on in our practice. I'm going to reshare my slides, and we're gonna go into specifically the 4 different challenges that we face in moments of uncertainty. So we talk about these 4 challenges, right? The challenge of facing loss, the challenge of encountering difference, the challenge of there being a power inequality, and then of course the challenge that we face every single day, change, that there is a change. I'm going to very quickly go over these 4 challenges. However, we will be digging really deeply into loss for this session. So let's talk for a second about difference first, and then we'll come back to loss because that's where we're going to be digging the most deeply. When we face moments of difference, we really have to think about how narrowly or broadly to bound our us. Now, what do I mean by that? We know from some of the work with Self Us Now that defining and knowing the shared experiences and shared values of your us is fundamental when it comes to relationships and when it comes to knowing your constituency, knowing the people that you lead. When we think about difference, sometimes we're tempted to just gloss over it. But when that difference keeps coming up, and it's not a source of excitement, but rather a source of depletion, we have to think about, well, who is my us? Who is my us? And how widely or narrowly am I going to bound that us in? How many people am I going to include or exclude in order to enable the agency of my us? So with difference, we're really thinking about, okay, there are different perspectives here. Is it worthwhile to reach across the table and work on that difference? Or is it worthwhile to very narrowly bound it in order to build our agency first as an us before reaching out and trying to bring others into that us? Okay, so you're really thinking about this in terms of inclusion and exclusion. Who's included in my us, who is excluded in my us, in an effort to really enable the agency of that us. We also talk about something called a third story, which is externalize. So you tell a story, you tell a narrative where the values that are shared are what is emphasized. So what do I mean by that? We have a reading on this where there's a couple going through a divorce, and no matter what they're doing, they can't resolve their difference. They just cannot get there. And what ends up happening in this story is this mediator comes in, and this third story is created that revolves around the children that are going through this divorce with their parents. And they are able to come to an agentic place by actually sharing the stories of their children, by putting the shared value of their children first. So that's a concept and something that we can keep digging into when it comes to difference. Now, power. All of us face power inequalities in different ways. And we talk about there being 4 narratives that are constantly at play in any kind of power differential. We have the dominant group and we have the subordinate group, right? The dominant group has a public narrative. This is what we believe, this is who we are, this is how we exert our power. But they also have a hidden narrative. And that's the stuff that happens behind closed doors, where people are coming together, discussing what's really going on. Same thing though with the subordinate group. The subordinate group might have a public narrative, for example, of compliance. We're gonna go along to get along, right? But they also have a hidden narrative. The thing that's happening behind closed doors, where they're really talking about the truth of how they feel about a situation. When we talk about surfacing hidden narratives, we talk about when is the right time to surface a hidden narrative in order to enable people's agency. And we talk about the idea of compliance and resistance. Sometimes for a subordinate group, it's better for them to stay on the compliant side until they feel ready to move towards a resistance side. It's all about the strategy around how most can people's agency be enabled on this continuum of compliance and resistance. And where on this continuum do you land in order to develop the most agency? Sometimes exposing a hidden narrative of a dominant group that is not in line with a public narrative can help break down some of their power. Similarly, coming together as a subordinate us and exposing the hidden narrative of the subordinate us can also start to break down these power structures that are at play. So these are the narratives that are at play in any moment of power inequality. So we talked about difference and we talked about power. Let's talk about change. Change happens. Change is gonna happen. And when change happens, we talk about people either reacting with fear or responding with hope. And when we talk about reacting with fear, in current day politics, in a lot of situations that we have day to day at work, we feel sometimes that we have to react with fear to that change because we don't know how else to cope. And it's the responsibility of whoever's in leadership to enable people to respond hopefully instead of feeling, again, painted into a corner and reacting with fear. These 4 ways to narrate change that you see down here at the bottom right, denying or rejecting change, accommodating change, adapting to change, and rejecting continuity. These are 4 different ways of narrating change. So rejecting or denying change is, this isn't happening, everything's all good, everything's the same, don't worry about it, right? Pretending like nothing has changed. Does that enable people's agency? To just like act like it doesn't exist, close your eyes, act like it doesn't exist? Yeah, I see some shaking heads. And the 4 people I see at the bottom of my screen are shaking their heads, so that's a good sign. Yeah, that doesn't enable people's agency, right? To just pretend like it's not happening. There's accommodating change, which is, okay, the change is happening, we can acknowledge that, but we're gonna try to keep as much similar as possible. We're gonna try to keep things as, as much in the old story as possible. That can enable people's agency. Okay, things are changing, but we're gonna try to hold on to the things that really work from our old story. Then there's this new story, and you can narrate change in a way that is, here's this change coming, it's an opportunity. Yes, we can keep some things from the past, but look at this opportunity to do things differently. And then finally, the last response or reaction is to deny or reject the past in any kind of way. This never existed to begin with. This was never how things were. That obviously is la la land a lot of the time, right? It's okay, no, there is a past and we need to acknowledge our history, but also understand that change is coming. Okay, I just threw a lot at you, right? Difference, power, and change. These are the 3 of the 4 kind of challenges that we talk about in module 2. I want to dig a little bit into loss. And we're going to dig into loss because the one framework that kind of lives throughout all 4 of these changes is something that we call the empathetic bridge. Can I just see a show of hands of who has heard of the empathetic bridge before? Okay, good. This is good. So this is a new concept for some folks. The empathetic bridge is a way of responding in moments of uncertainty. It's a way of responding to change, to loss, to difference, to power. And thinking specifically about loss, when loss happens, we need to be able to respond to it in such a way that acknowledges the loss, but also provides us a way to move forward. Think about some losses that you faced in your life, right? Think about, let's say, death. You lose someone in your life. And how many times have you gone to try to comfort someone who has just lost someone and feel like you just screwed it up even more? Has anyone experienced that? Like, I'm trying to comfort you, but you're just like more upset at the end of this conversation. Yeah, that's real. That's a thing that happens because it's hard to help people respond to a loss like that. A loss in an election, right? A loss of a campaign. Loss happens all the time. And what we are required to do as leaders is, again, to help people respond with agency instead of reacting with fear. And we talk about responses to loss in 2 ways. You can face a loss and either end up with a contamination narrative or you can end up with a redemptive narrative. Now, what do I mean by that? What is a redemptive narrative when it comes to loss? Can someone just like take a stab at that? What does it mean to respond with redemption instead of contamination? What do folks think? Oh, I'm gonna cold call.
I think it means that this is Cheryl.
Cheryl,
Unmute me. How you doing? I think it means that you respond by not necessarily saying you forgive or saying you excuse, but you lead with that so that the person understands that you're trying to meet them where they are, and then you try to bring them forward. That's a stab.
Yeah, can you say a little bit more about the bringing them forward part? Say a little bit more about that.
The bringing them forward would be to move them out of to try to help move them out of their sorrow, their discomfort, into more of a place of safety, or if we can get them there, even into a place of power. Self-power, self-knowledge.
That's really good. That's really, really good. So instead of them responding with like contamination, which looks like this always happens to me, I always face this, I'm always the person losing someone or something, right? Which can be so toxic and can just hold us back from moving forward, right? We ask them to respond instead with redemption, with, yes, this loss happened. Yes, it's really challenging, but I have a choice to make here too. I have a choice to respond in a way that says, this thing happened, it was horrible, but I can move forward in my power. Or I'm gonna stay kind of planted in my grief, in my contamination, to a point where I can't move forward, right? So I'm gonna reshare my screen in a second here. When we look at this challenge here of loss, right? The empathetic bridge is a tool with which we can help people acknowledge the loss, experience empathy, experience hope, and then create a choice. And we're gonna go into that in a second. But if you look at that second bullet, we're trying to exercise leadership by using narrative to enable a redemptive response instead of a contaminative reaction. So Cheryl, right? Was that Cheryl that was talking earlier?
Yes.
I want to make sure I got the name right. Yeah. So as Cheryl said, do you help people come into their power and see a loss from a redemptive lens, or are they going to stay in a contaminative place? okay? And again, there's a difference between contamination and grief. We need to feel grief when we lose something because it's part of our process. However, contamination is staying and stewing in that. It's that predictive, this is gonna happen again and again and again to me. That's what we're trying to steer people away from. So then we come to the empathetic bridge. The empathetic bridge is a way to help people respond with agency instead of reacting without agency. So as you can see the top right of this image, there's somebody who faces a challenge, okay? And that somebody could be an us as well, a group of people face a challenge. For the purposes of today, let's focus on loss. So people experience a loss, right? The first step is to acknowledge the challenge. Acknowledge, in this case, the loss, okay? We're gonna break down these 4 steps in a second. The second step is to then express empathy, okay? Not in an artificial way, in a real way. And that's actually deceptively very hard to do. And we'll get into that in a second. The third step is to then narrate hope. Okay, so I've acknowledged it, I've expressed empathy, and now I'm trying to show us that there's a way forward. Here, let me give you some hope in a way forward. And then finally, to enable choice. Okay, now that we see that you can make a decision here, you have the agency to either respond with a redemptive narrative or to react and stay in contamination. Okay, so these are the 4 steps. Let's go through them one more time. You acknowledge a challenge, you express empathy, you narrate hope, and then you enable choice. Now, I want to take it out of the abstract in just a second, so we're going to watch an example. But before we do, I want us to just make sure we're on the same page about what all of these things even mean, right? So, get your unmute button ready, because I'm going to be asking questions, and it's got to move quickly, all right? So, question number 1, why is it important to acknowledge the loss? Why is it important to acknowledge that this loss happened? What happens if you don't acknowledge the loss?
The person won't be ready to hear you because they feel that they haven't been heard.
Who said that?
Nizar.
Nizar, okay, I can't see your face, but I hear your voice, but I'm sure you're there somewhere.
I am.
Okay, oh there, okay, your video's not on, that's fine. Nizar, say a little bit more about that, please. What do you mean?
I've experienced it, right? If the other person doesn't register that you actually heard them and you're at least acknowledging the state they are in, anything you say after that is they're just not gonna hear it. There's this need to make the other person feel, and not understand, feel that you're feeling with them. After that, then they can have the space and the mental state and the emotional state to think differently and approach the challenge differently.
I love this. This is like a philosopher on the call. I love this. Thank you as well. Yeah. Yeah. So was someone going to chime in?
Roberta,
go ahead.
I was going to say that in addition to what Nizar said, that people in the midst of loss feel deeply ungrounded. And so when we hear them, when they feel that we've heard them, that helps them feel grounded. They also feel like they're going crazy. And so, and I shouldn't say they, we. And, you know, so when somebody acknowledges my loss, I feel like my feet land back on the ground, and I feel like that I'm not crazy. Somebody's seeing the world, helping me be present.
Yeah, that's really, really important, right? Sometimes when a loss happens, people just want to, again, gloss over it, right? Listen, it's all good, it's fine, no big deal, let's move on. Right? That's really useless because it's not actually helping the person feel seen or heard, right? Acknowledging the loss, you know what? It seems so simple, but people forget to do it all the time, all the time. I'll give you an example. I was at a funeral a couple months ago, and the amount of people that came up to me and that said, everything's gonna be okay, you know, you're gonna get through this. Do you know what I'm saying? People have experienced that when a death happens. It doesn't acknowledge the fact that, like, sure, yeah, that all might happen in the future, but right now it feels like crap, right? Right now, I need you to acknowledge the fact that that loss happened to begin with, right? That's very fundamental. Now, that next step. Okay, so I've acknowledged that the loss has happened. Now I'm going to express empathy. What does expressing empathy look like? What does that mean? Anybody? Jonathan, you think you're like getting away with it, eh? Jonathan, what does it mean to express empathy?
Yeah, I imagine there's kind of a spectrum. It's the idea of relating to that person's experience. And so maybe that's as simple as, you know, saying so, like saying I'm sorry. But I imagine that a more personal version of that looks like sharing an experience that maybe builds some sense of commiseration, this idea that we're in this together, you know, without making it about you. Yeah. It's recognizing that you recognize how hard that is.
Yeah. And that's a tough balance to strike, right? To express empathy, help people see that you two have faced similar situations without making it and co-opting and making it about yourself, right? So how you express empathy in a way that is genuine and loving and from a place of strength, to help that person feel seen without, again, turning it around and making it about yourself. Now, the third step, narrating hope. What does that look like for folks? What do people think about narrating hope? What does that mean?
Muhammad.
Yeah, go for it, Muhammad.
I think narrating hope is to express that the loss of mine is the loss of us, and to link this loss because it's sometimes challenging to express that my loss is the loss of the whole agency. So narrating the hope is the link, or I think it's the point that you start link that your loss is the loss of everyone, and that you need to take an action.
Okay, I want to focus on the last part of what you said around taking an action. Can someone build on that? What does that mean? What's the hope part of this all look like? What do you think?
If I may, I think, hi.
Selma, wow, it's so good to see you. Yeah, go for it.
Narrating hope to me is about sharing a vision of the future and the possibilities that lie therein. So when people usually have had a loss, they cannot see beyond that loss. And so when you commiserate and sort of say, I feel you, I hear you, I understand, but maybe we can look at what is possible for the future. So that's giving a glimmer of hope.
Yeah.
So I think that's what it means to me.
That's really good. So a way to move forward, a way to look at the future in a way that is hopeful, that is visionary, that allows the person to see that where they are right now is not necessarily where they have to stay, but there is a vision for something different. Now that can look like, and I'm trying to kind of look at the chat at the same time I'm talking, but Ben, which is great to see you too, Ben, I'm seeing you say, okay, it's not just like, okay, there's a vision for the future, but hey, we've done this before. You've overcome this thing before. You can do it again, right? A way to show people that they have the emotional resources to move forward. Finally, you enable a choice. And I'm gonna zip through this because I think this one is the clearest one where I've acknowledged it, I've empathized with it, I've narrated the fact that there's a path forward, and now it's your choice to react or respond with fear or with hope. Okay, now let's take this out of the abstract. We're gonna watch an example. It's something that I'm sure a lot of you have seen. It's a Bobby Kennedy, it's 5 minutes. And it's his speech that he gave right after the assassination of Martin Luther King. What I want you to listen for is where and how do the empathetic bridge come into play in this speech, okay? How does it and does it not come into play? All right, so let us watch. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, and I'm going to, all right, here we go. Sorry, you're seeing me kiss my husband here. All right, let me expand this. Oops, now it's not expanding. Okay, great. So I'm going to mute myself and we're going to watch this together and then we will debrief it. Here we go.
On the presidential campaign trail in Indiana, April 4th, 1968, Robert Kennedy was about to speak to an enthusiastic crowd when a reporter brought him the devastating news. Martin Luther King had been shot and killed in Memphis. His prepared remarks useless, here Kennedy breaks the news to a stunned and disbelieving audience.
Okay, Sarah, I don't know if you can hear the video, but...
The nation we are.
I think I muted myself and that makes you not be able to hear it. Sorry. Okay,
Yes,
let's start this from the beginning.
We started from his remarks not being useful anymore, and yeah, that's...
Perfect. Okay,
His
so
prepared remarks useless.
here
Kennedy breaks the news to a stunned
okay.
and disbelieving audience.
Some very sad news for all of you, and that is that Martin Luther King was shot and was killed tonight in Memphis. Martin Luther King dedicated his life to love and to justice between fellow human beings. He died in the cause of that effort. In this difficult day, in this difficult time for the United States, it's perhaps well to ask what kind of a nation we are and what direction we want to move in. For those of you who are Black, considering the evidence evidently is that there were white people who were responsible, you can be filled with bitterness and with hatred and a desire for revenge. We can move in that direction as a country, in greater polarization, Black people amongst Blacks and white amongst whites, filled with hatred toward one another. Or we can make an effort, as Martin Luther King did, to understand and to comprehend and replace that violence, that stain of bloodshed that is spread across our land, with an effort to understand compassion and love. For those of you who are Black and are tempted to be filled with hatred and mistrust of the injustice of such an act against all white people, I would only say that I can also feel in my own heart the same kind of feeling. I had a member of my family killed, but he was killed by a white man. But we have to make an effort in the United States. We have to make an effort to understand, to get beyond or go beyond these rather difficult times. My favorite poem, my favorite poet was Aeschylus. He once wrote, "Even in our sleep, pain which cannot forget falls drop by drop upon the heart, until in our own despair, against our will, comes wisdom through the awful grace of God." What we need in the United States is not division. What we need in the United States is not hatred. What we need in the United States is not violence and lawlessness, but is love and wisdom and compassion toward one another, feeling of justice, toward those who still suffer within our country, whether they be white or whether they be black. We can do well in this country. We will have difficult times. We've had difficult times in the past, but we will have difficult times in the future. It is not the end of violence. It is not the end of lawlessness, and it's not the end of disorder. But the vast majority of white people and the vast majority of black people in this country want to live together, want to improve the quality of our life, and want justice for all human beings that abide in our land. And what dedicate ourselves to what the Greeks wrote so many years ago, to tame the savageness of man and make gentle the life of this world. Let us dedicate ourselves to that and say a prayer for our country and for our people. Thank you very much.
Okay. Still kind of heavy to watch that. So let's process it together for a second, and let's process it through the vision of the empathetic bridge and of the response to this loss. So again, prepare your unmute buttons because we're gonna do some talking here. What did you notice about how Kennedy did or did not acknowledge the loss? What did people see?
He said you in the very beginning.
Is that Cheryl?
Yeah.
Can you say that again, Cheryl?
He said you in the very beginning instead of us when he talked about terrible loss.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, he made up for it in other things he said, and eventually got to we, but it definitely did not start off as we, and that really struck me.
That's really interesting. What are your thoughts on that? Why do you think that was the case?
I think he was in shock. I mean, I like him, so I'm going to be generous. I think he was in shock. I think, he was doing this off the top of his head, so he probably had to get there, and he, in the moment, he just didn't say we. I mean, as I said, he got there later, but not at the very beginning.
It's a really interesting observation. What else did people notice about the way he did or did not acknowledge the loss?
I think he was so genuine. His body language looked to me genuine and empathic. And also the way that he provided two options. One option, violent, the other option, understanding and reconnecting, rebridging, and advocating for the rebridge. I think that also was so inspiring, and the hope part.
Yeah, thank you for that. So we'll get to that kind of enabling people's choice in a second, but let's really focus on acknowledgement of the loss.
Well,
yeah, go ahead.
I think he shared his loss when he spoke and said that my parents were killed also.
So that's what part of the bridge do you think that is?
He wanted to bridge to start the hope, because after that he said that we want America in another way.
So that piece of sharing his own experience, though, what part of the bridge would that be?
Sharing his loss with the group.
Who else said that? Someone else said something?
Brother.
What is it?
I said it's expressing empathy.
Who is that?
Who's saying that? My name?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm Hiba. Sorry, I didn't introduce myself in the beginning.
Oh, no, that's okay. Yeah, can you say a little bit more about that? Why do you think it's expressing empathy?
Because in the beginning, he was just talking about them as in you, for those of you who are Black. And I think that's the fair thing to do, given the long history of oppression and suppression that group of people has faced in the States. And then when we talked about expressing empathy, we talked about connecting with the people while mentioning a personal experience, but without really making it about yourself. But in a way, he's validating what they are feeling. He's saying, I can relate, but this is also about you in the larger context, I think.
Yeah, that's good. So we'll dig into that in a second. And I think what you're lifting up is really important. It is an expression of empathy, and we'll dig into that a little bit more. Anything else about acknowledging the loss? And I think Jim, is it Jim? Let me look up here. Yeah, Jim, you wrote something about presuming to be a part of the us. Can you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, this is Jim. I was just imagining that, you were saying that it was mostly a group of Black folks, and that I was imagining that he didn't want to say sort of, I know how you feel, this affects me as much as it does you, blah, 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 because that might be sort of reductive, might distance people more than to say, this is an awful thing that I know is affecting you. And then he bridges later, when he talks about his own brother being killed.
Interesting. Yeah, thank you for that, Jim. Very interesting, right? So what I'm hearing from you is him as a part of the dominant group didn't want to assert himself in the beginning as a part of that us, but really acknowledging the loss of that community first before trying to put himself in it, is what I'm hearing from you. And I'm seeing Holly is typing something in here. Holly, can you say that out loud instead of typing it?
What I wrote was he was acknowledging the loss to the crowd. And I've read a little bit on this before. It was a predominantly African-American crowd. And he was tying and acknowledging that loss by indicating that he knew that a white man had shot a very instrumental and important Black leader. And so that was an acknowledgement of a huge loss, but he also kind of expressed some empathy by acknowledging his huge loss, also perpetrated by a white man.
So very interesting, right? And that's when we start to get to that empathy piece. So we see that there might be problems with the way he acknowledges it, but there also might be a strategy to why he acknowledges in that way, right? Then we move to the expression of empathy. And we started talking about this a little bit, right? Okay, I also lost someone to the hands of a white man. Why do you think why is that what he shares? Why do you think that's his strategy in the way that he expresses empathy? What do folks think?
I think that would later on take him to the choice part, which is basically once he says that because a white man killed a Black leader, he wants to emphasize a white man also killed my brother, and instead of creating violence, we should go toward bridging.
It's really interesting, right? Because in that moment, he shares something that's very public. People know this, right? People know that this is something that happened, but also very, very deeply personal, right? And it's an interesting choice for him to share it in those words and to express empathy in that way. Do you think that by him doing that, he was co-opting that moment, or do you think he was trying to relate and express empathy? Remember, we're talking about that kind of tightrope balance. How do you think he did in that?
I think it was empathy. He wanted to create empathy, but at the same time, that was a vehicle to work on his option of choice.
Cool. So a way to move people forward. Other thoughts on this? And I want to hear from some voices I haven't heard from before. What do other people think about that kind of tightrope balance between expressing empathy and taking over that moment?
So I feel like he gave some context before he shared his personal story. So he said, I know, but the people could feel bitterness and hatred and a desire for revenge. And I understand those feelings. This happened to me and I feel that too. And so I feel like it wasn't him just trying to say, well, this happened to me, but it was helping people see that, like, yeah, I understand that these are feelings that people have and show that empathy. And so I thought that was really good.
Yeah, thanks for that, Amanda. That's really, really good. Ahmed, were you going to say something?
Yeah, to me, what was quite patently obvious is very authentic crowd, very authentic and not patronizing at all, what he said. But I think that last bit where he talked about his brother's death, he was able to, if you think a gulf between the white and the African American community, he was able to walk across the bridge to the other side and be with them, and in a way hold their hand in order to then build the bridge or move them across the bridge. So to me, it was a great bridging activity that he had undertaken.
That's really interesting, right? So we heard maybe in the beginning he was distancing himself from the us, but in sharing his experience and in the process of narrating hope, he's bringing himself into that us as someone who also is experiencing that loss. Now, what about the hope piece? How does he narrate a path forward? How does he narrate hope? And I see some, Dan and Carolina, why don't we hear your voices as well as what you're writing? Dan, why don't you kick us off? What are your thoughts?
No, so on the last question, just feeling like that was such an important moment where he really started creating in us, going from, in many ways, just trying to put myself in his shoes, being a white politician speaking before a Black audience. And when he actually shared the loss of his brother, I think it was the first moment where it started to shift, and through that shared experience of loss, started to create a little more of an us around, the experience of being human beings in this country.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's really, really good. Carolina, what are your thoughts?
So I was saying that he normalized those sensations of anxiety, of uncertainty, and maybe they want to revenge and those negative aspects. And he said basically that there is a choice, and what is the advantage of moving past those things that you might be feeling.
Yeah.
So it doesn't just say take this choice or make this choice, but it shines the light on the advantages of those.
That's really, really good. I think what you're naming and what you're saying is very much about not only the narration of hope, but the enablement of choice, right? Enabling an agentic choice in that moment. And what a horrible moment to have to stand up and take leadership. But he stood up and took leadership. And this was his attempt at creating that bridge. There's a lot more we can dig into in this speech. We didn't even touch the poem, but I really want to get us to a place where we can practice and try this empathetic bridge on ourselves. Sound good to folks? Okay, so that was an example, right? It was an example of a way to approach a loss from a leadership perspective in a way that can enable people to move forward with agency. Now, I'm going to reshare our slides here. Okay, why doesn't it pop up? Here we go. Okay, so here we go. Can somebody please, and folks who are silent readers, please read this to yourself, but just for those who, it's helpful to hear it, can somebody please read this case out loud? Can folks see it well?
Not really.
Is it small?
I can read it.
Perfect.
When I was in the 8th grade, the principal of my high school left town a couple of months after starting his contract without telling anyone, or any of the community at least. The principal had gotten money for construction and, along with a variety of other things, had decided to put on a new roof. Winter happened to come early that year, which meant that the construction season had to end. Alaska winters are no joke. And also that we were going through winter without a true roof. They put some Tyvek, which is heavy plastic wrapping, to cover, but there was still water dripping through electrical sockets and the hallways were lined with plastic buckets. This, among other things, like the high school being named a dropout factory, was a prime factor the principal left. The case I will analyze is the way my teacher presented this news to our class and what effect that had. The teacher was in the middle school gymnasium health computers instructor. He was white in a predominantly Alaska Native school and had lived in Bethel for about 10 years. He was married to an Alaska Native lady and they had 2 sons at the high school. He was the one that should have been the leader in this context. The class was made up of 8th graders, the vast majority of whom had lived in Bethel their entire lives. I was one of these students. For context, I am from an extremely rural place in Alaska that is accessible only by plane. It is fairly rare for outsiders to last more than 2 years in town, with many not even making it more than a year. This meant that already, through most of our lives, many of the teachers and other professionals we encountered did not stay long, and thus we did not trust them. This case did stand out, however, as it was the first time we had seen someone just get up and leave in the middle of the school year. A feeling of betrayal was certainly felt among the class, and the exact moment of leadership challenge was when the teacher told us this news. I am still not sure exactly why he was the one telling us, but that is how it was. He broke the news to use by playing the John Denver song, Leaving on a Jet Plane, and then telling us how the principal had just jumped on a jet plane and taken off. He told us this while laughing, and we laughed along, but I don't think that it was true laughter. It was more so to mask the feeling of betrayal and also a feeling of deep insecurity that our home was so bad that our own principal couldn't last for more than a few months.
Thank you so much, Holly. That was really well read. Do folks get an understanding of what the situation is here? Yeah, it's pretty clear, right? In the 8th grade, principal up and leaves within the middle of the school year, right? And it's up to the teacher to break the news to the students. So it's a moment of loss wherein the teacher needs to break the news to the students. Oh, I'm seeing a request. Let me just paste the text right into the chat box for those who didn't finish reading it. Sorry about that. So it should be right here in your chat box now. Or maybe not. Maybe, Rowan, would you mind, you have the slideshow as well, would you mind just pasting that in? So it's that moment of challenge where the teacher has to acknowledge the loss and help students decide whether they move forward with hope or they stay in a contaminative narrative. Now, this is what we're going to do. We saw the response of the teacher. What was the response of the teacher? How did the teacher use narrative in that moment to help or hurt their students? What do folks remember? What did they
made a joke of it, kind of.
Yeah, made light of it. What else? How else did he respond in that moment?
He laughed.
He laughed. As an 8th grade student, how do you think you would have felt in that moment? Putting yourself in the shoes of an 8th grade student. That your teacher just makes a joke out of it.
Betrayed.
Uh-huh. Another word, another emotion?
Confused.
Uh-huh. What else?
Well, that all this is a joke, not just the we're living, but the old school schools.
Yeah.
Not validated.
Totally, right? Totally.
Totally not acknowledging the emotion and different responses each child would have.
Yes. Yes.
They're not legitimizing what's in the room, and it's a real lost opportunity.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. It is all of the things you just named, right? You feel like nobody wants to stay in your city to begin with, let alone your principal leaves in the middle of a school year. All the feelings that you're feeling are just completely shoved aside with a song and a laugh, okay? Really, really bad example of leadership. You all in here have more experience than that, okay? So what I would like you to do is you're gonna get into breakout rooms right now in pairs. And I'm gonna just share my screen for a second. What you're gonna do in these pairs is you're gonna practice the empathetic bridge yourself. So remember the 4 steps, copy and paste them somewhere if you need to for a reference. Again, it's acknowledging the loss, expressing empathy, narrating hope, and then enabling choice. So using the empathetic bridge, you're going to practice how you would respond to this scenario if you were the teacher and your partner was the 8th grade student. Then you'll get 2 minutes of feedback and coaching from your partner, okay? Your partner can give direct feedback, but also can coach you to help you get stronger in some areas that you might have been weaker in the bridge. So coaches, you're asking questions to help that person get stronger in that piece that they were weak in. Then you'll switch. The other person will try the bridge and the other person will then give feedback. And then we'll have 1 minute to come back to the large room. So I'm going to give you 8 minutes in total to do all of this. Please keep time. Take 1 minute at the beginning to introduce yourselves to each other. 2 minutes to practice, 2 minutes of feedback. Am I doing math wrong? I'm gonna give you 10 minutes, sorry. 2 minutes to practice, 2 minutes of feedback. You switch and then you come back to the large room, okay? So we'll see you back here in 10 minutes. If we can send people to breakout rooms, that would be great.
Go.
I think most people are back, or no, not yet. Maybe, I don't know. Okay, if we can just take 30 seconds for every single person on this call to just in the chat box type, what did you take away with you from this session and from the practice you just did? Take 30 seconds, we'll hear a couple voices, and then we'll shut this baby down.
Sarah, would you like me to read what people are writing in the chat? Or...
That would be awesome.
Okay, cool. So Fatima says, I learned how to acknowledge, empathize, and create how to lead our school is a good community. Ellen, hey Ellen. We can convey sense of hope by acknowledging the loss and the feeling that we have in response to, offer hope by recognizing the strength of school community to build stronger future, a need for the authenticity and being empathetic. That was Kim. Jim said it reminded him of the importance of empathy before problem solving. That's great. Kanoko, afraid to intensify emotion on loss, so tendencies to back off rather than to get close to emotion. That's a very real challenge there. Hamad says bringing the loss to hope. Ahmed said to acknowledge others' loss first, then empathizing with the other group. Jim said, oh, Jim, yes, you will have access to the slides. Grady, the importance of being authentic and explicit and acknowledging the reality of the situation and the feeling of loss one imagines that the others feel. Holly says, I am pretty new to this curriculum. I'm grateful for the idea of the empathetic bridge. I'm looking forward to applying it. Natasha, thinking about choices you want people want to be able to make and working backwards. Celine, it's a tough choice to give a student. As a teacher, we try to protect them. Anjali, oh, okay, now it's moving too fast. Anjali says Celine said it's tough. As a teacher, you try to protect them, actually making sure that they don't get impacted by certain events so that they can focus on their studies. Sarah, tell me when you want me to stop. Anjali says importance of ending with a choice that is real and actual, enables agency in the case practice that was challenging for me. Carolina says, I always find it interesting to experience people who are thinking the same as me on different scenarios. There are so many that are in common among people like us. We talk about validation and empathy, also the importance of reassurance and hope. Natasha says, creating a sense of us while narrating hope. Ahmed, also important to show that we've been there before as a community. Masha, finding shared experience of loss is crucial to the empathetic bridge. Dan, importance of naming the road to contamination, which we're often afraid to name, versus redemption, so people can clearly see the choice and the agency is there in making a decision. And Meredith says, great one-on-one with Roberta. I learned to focus on some helpful phrasing to avoid any language that may seem presuming.
That's great. Ooh, awesome. Awesome. So this was a real crash course, okay? We can continue building on this, learning from it. I know this was at a really fast speed, but a way to kind of introduce you to some of these frameworks and how they work together. We are at time. So Rowan, what's the best way to handle kind of evaluation and wrapping things up?
Yes, so you all are going to be receiving an email from us. If you could, and in the email there is an evaluation link. So we would really appreciate it if you could send that to us. Just respond to that email. Also, James, if you can put the link in right now, so that people are still on their laptops. It's just a couple questions, just some pluses, deltas, and key learnings, and a couple like multiple choice questions. Thanks everyone. Oh, okay. So while we wait for James to do that, thanks everyone for attending and taking the time to do this. We would love your feedback to see how we can continue doing these sessions in the future, and hopefully we'll bring Sarah again. Sarah, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I know you did this last year and to come again this year with us. Your wealth of knowledge, the way you're able to open up conversation and challenge people, and give us room to practice is very much appreciated. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everybody. It's so good to see all your faces, new and old.